Let's go.
Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast, where we expand your personal universe. I'm Diana Marquetta, and in each episode, Soul Fam co-founder, co-creator Lexi Strummer-Solden and I interview the world's most rising and longtime experts in consciousness, spirituality, entertainment, healing, and science. From Earth's dimensions and dimensions way, way beyond. On the Soul Fam podcast, our frequencies are high and your heart chakras will open as these powerful voices of today share cutting-edge research, profound experiences, and valuable knowledge for your world in this out-of-this-world, thought-provoking, envelope-pushing interviews that could only take place right here on the Soul Fam podcast. Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast. Today we have a return guest that we are super excited to talk with about her evolution, her new work, and some new discoveries she's made about her own quest in her journey, her spiritual and conscious journey, and new offerings she has for the collective, which we feel really resonate right now and really push the boundary of what's been available previously. So we welcome you to hear Ixte. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. There's just so much, I think, swirling about in my world. I think it's kind of been the theme for the last year and a half for me. It has been really nonstop, but today I feel good. Like there's some clarity, which is really, really great. I don't see it full on in front of me, but I do see at least a few steps before me. And that's really all I can ask for.
Good. I was going to say, if you're seeing a few steps before you, that's more than I am. So, and I think that sense of like a lack of clarity, or like we are walking around in this fog and a little bit of a cloud. And I'm not saying people are misguided, but that there seems to be a little bit of a difficulty for us to like see ahead. It's like forcing us to be very present, which I'm not always great at. Sometimes I don't like being present, but it's forcing me to really be grounded.
What comes to mind, and I feel like you're definitely not alone, but a few things that really come to mind is like, we really feel like things aren't really clear. What I find is that there might be a lot of external stimulation, right? There might be a lot of things that we're tapping into, media being a really big part of that. Also the people that we interact with, and if they're in their own dust storm too, right? Right? That really does affect us too, right? So, but at the same time, I don't know if you remember me mentioning this, or I can't even remember if I mentioned it the last time I was on here, was that I'm a highly sensitive person, so HSP. And so for me, even though I may not be overstimulated externally, there's still internal stimulation that happens. And so for me, being still sometimes can be too much, that I actually need to go for a walk and meditate with movement to kind of move through that. I'm not going to say I'm perfect with those practices, right? I try to remember, I take my time to see, well, what do I need most at this time? Astrologically speaking, my moon is in Gemini, so I need to talk through my emotions. It's part of the process. But at the same time, I know it's like, well, is someone else available to hear what I'm going through? That might not always be the case. And I think that's what I've noticed in the last year, is that everyone's been going through a big, big shift and change, a lot of letting go and moving through that. We're all individually going through our own experience, but it has the same energy, feel, resonance at the same time, right? So it's, even though it's my own individual experience, I know someone else is going through a similar experience of their own. So there is some camaraderie in that. At the same time, it's like, well, where do the boundaries lie? Right. So if we're in this storm within ourselves, I think it's really asked us to kind of revert back and say, well, what tools do I have here to help me through that process? sometimes stillness helps. Sometimes it's not what we need. Maybe we do need to move the body. Not to go on a tangent.
No, I think that resonates with our listeners a lot. It certainly resonates with me because I know I can't necessarily, I'm actually learning to sit and meditate and feel a little bit more of the processing and not a disassociate, but become unattached to it so that I can see it from a broader perspective. And then I'm always in like a moving meditation. I'm sort of here, but not here. Do you want to give us a little update on what's happening with you? I know you have kind of declared your own independence and you started your own expedition into this with a lot of different offerings to your clients and to groups and to individuals, seeking their path.
Yeah, I can give you guys an update. I went on a trip to Egypt with a group of just magical people at the end of 2022. And upon my return, there was just big things unfolding in my visionary quest, with interactions and conversations with guides, and even the clarity of who my guides are and what place they're in. There was definitely a tower experience for me, a revelation of like really what's to come, what I needed to let go of to allow a really new reality for me to form. Now, I don't want to give all the details yet because, right, just like a seed, it's like, okay, we want to keep it nurtured in the soil first and not give too many details, but I can share what is evident, I have shared with my community up to this point, which I'm excited about. So, yeah, I really did go independent, and am focusing on, well, what is it that I do want to teach? And making sure that it resonates with me and what I've learned over the last decade of my practice. And I am still doing one-on-one sessions. That's always available. I do that one-on-one, and I do that online. I do that in person. I've been so blessed to have a space to do those one-on-ones at Open Eye Crystals, which is in Mid-City, if you're familiar with Madison. Yeah, so I'm there doing healings, available to do that. And that's the other thing. I've actually resorted through and said, well, what practices do I still want to offer? And so I have changed a few things, but main things that I do offer are one, light, language, and Reiki combined. And light language has really been something that has evolved for me. Speaking in tongues has kind of been something that's happened as a child and moved into adulthood, and I didn't really know what was happening until when I came back from Egypt, things really became clear that it was my collaboration with my guides that I started to speak this light language.
Awesome.
And Reiki being one of the things that I do now, I've been guided to combine those two things. So that's really something that I see great change with people, but I'm still a fan of my underworld healing sessions. And that is like the juicy, we go really deep in those sessions where it's when we're thinking about, well, what patterns am I facing? What are the things? I want to get to the core root of something and change that root to become something else. And in the underworld sessions, that we do that. And that's where everything comes together for me. I'm doing light language. I'm doing Reiki. There's crystals. There's chromotherapy that's combined here as well, which is color therapy. And there's ancestors that really do come through these sessions if it's appropriate, not all the time, but it's everything all together is in that underworld healing session. And I do that remotely. I do that in person. So all of these services are really both available in those ways. And then I also have ancestral healing, lineage healing, which is really focused on, I want to either build a relationship with an ancestor, get to know my ancestors, maybe start to have a relationship with them. And at the same time, it's a beautiful service because I always approach it as a way of being of service to the lineage. I always tell my clients, we're coming to do this work with this ancestral healing to offer something to the lineage that no one else has been either courageous enough to do, aware enough, conscious enough to come and do. And we just allow the ancestor, whoever is ready to receive it, in line to come and receive that. And in doing so, yes, the side effects are you may see changes in your own world. There may be changes in your family members that you may see by doing this work consistently, but it's never the goal, right? The goal is to be of service. I do approach it that way because that's how I was taught by my teachers in fairy tradition. And this is fairy tradition being an underworld tradition at its roots. So yeah, just kind of checking the ego a little bit before we go into the service, I think is really essentially what we're talking about when I'm saying that.
So that is a whole,
but it's one of my,
I'm sorry. That is a flip on what I had understood ancestral healing to be. I find that super fascinating because I think the perception, at least currently, is that if I'm healing something within myself, I'm healing something within my ancestral line, or I'm healing the ancestral line within myself. Not that I am particularly connecting with an ancestor, let's say my grandfather or my great 17th grandmother, to heal something for them. It never dawned on me in that particular way that is a thing of service.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think neither answer is wrong, I want to say, right? Because I think it's both ends of the spectrum. You can approach it as, well, this is coming up for me now. Why? Oh, could be a pattern in the lineage. It's affecting me being in my full power. Where I think that can also be the way we approach. That's why, like, underworld healing is kind of moving into that doorway, from that doorway of what's present for me as the individual, right? The ancestral lineage healing service that I do, I enter the doorway of service in that for the lineage. So it's two ways to enter this space. I don't think one is wrong, one is better than the other, but I do see more power in kind of making sure we check the ego at the door and then coming and say, I'm going to just do this for the service. And I think that's also an evolution of consciousness, right? Because sometimes we do start with what's right in front of us. Okay, right now I'm facing this issue right now. I'm facing a pattern of entering relationships that are toxic.
Exactly.
Me, right? Whether that be friendship or romantic, right? Or relationships with work and career, right? And that's why we would do an underworld healing. Okay, well, this is present for me now. And then in that healing, we broaden the consciousness to say, oh, wait a minute, there's something bigger than me here. So we start having relationships with all the other things that we're connected to and may say, you know what, I want to actually have an ancestral practice in my life. I want to have a relationship now because it can be collaborative and beautiful. And we can go and do a service for that. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes our soul has this inkling of like, I just want to have a relationship with my ancestors. I don't know why. I don't know where to start. And I think that's also what ancestral healing service can do is, well, let's begin, because sometimes it can be that inkling to like just follow the intuition, follow this. That's the thing, right? It's like, well, there's this voice that's speaking to me. What is telling me? And we sometimes, if we know what's ahead, that gets in the way of really diving into the work. And I do have clients that come and see me. It's like, I don't know what it is. Somebody's telling me to talk to them. Can you help me? Yes, I can. So when we do that one-on-one service, you meet a ancestor who's ready. And then I then coach that individual to say, well, how do we continue to build a relationship with this ancestor who's chosen to speak to us? And in that way, broaden our list of co-creators, right? Spirit guides. And now it becomes this relationship with not just the self and the things we see, but a relationship with what we don't see.
Oh, that's so exciting. So enticing.
It is so
because I often feel like there's sort of the voice in my head or somebody hanging around on my shoulders, or I see patterns repeated in my family over and over and over again. And there's like, well, why is Uncle so-and-so like that? Or why was Grandpa like that? Or why did they leave that country and come over here? And then we also see what's happening in the news, like it or not. And I'm sure there's lots of people that are triggered by that. And like this is this something that's going on from generation to generation to generation? And we're seeing it again repeated in history. And
Yeah.
is there a way to release all this and as a collective and as individuals, reach a higher sense of self through this healing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful perspective. I think a lot of us look at it like this big thing. I guess I would just encourage you and listeners to be like, it's great to think of the bigger picture, but don't be overwhelmed by it. Sometimes when we think of like, oh my God, I'm doing a service for the collective, can be really overwhelmed because now you've taken the responsibility of the whole world on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And then when it's like when we're not seeing movement or change, then we become more resentful or frustrated with the work. Right? It's about trust, right? And saying, if I'm in the moment and I just take this moment, this opportunity that's right in front of me, I trust that it is making a difference. It's all again, it's the unseen. You're not going to be able to see the change in the larger spectrum of what's happening on the earth. You're just not. You can do the research. Somebody may talk about it. Somebody may feel it, but you're not going to really see it. And I think that's, what underworld tradition really is about. Or if we talk about the dark mother, if we talk about the void, if we talk about the divine feminine, we're talking about the spaces that we don't see and that we have to fall into trust. So just know that it is making a difference, because it is an energy shift. It is an awakening of consciousness, expanding and opening up. And I think it really does say something for someone who says, oh my gosh, I could see how this may affect and help the collective. Well, that's huge. A lot of people don't think of things that way. So if you're already thinking in that if you're looking at it through that lens, that's powerful. But don't get lost in that, because you are only one person. So you have to really think about what's in front of me. What is my lineage? What is it, the pattern perhaps that I'm looking at now that should be tended to? What's available? And all that is available to us is in the moment.
Right, exactly.
It's nowhere else.
So let's talk about the dark mother.
Oh, I'm so excited about that question or statement, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Where do I start? I think I should start with how that relationship is with me as like myself. Let me take a pause, make sure I know where to start.
It's fascinating. Even just the term itself is intriguing and fascinating. And I'm like, oh, the dark mother. Do I know her?
You do know her. The dark mother, I like to introduce like visually, is to think of her as a diamond, or perhaps, let's just say for the sake of like connection, it's like, think of her as a big obsidian stone, right? And there's different facets to this stone, and she comes through to each of us in different ways, in different forms. So there are different ways to connect to her. She is the void. She is the divine feminine. She is the fairy queen. She is the great grandmother spider in indigenous cultures. You may have heard that name. She is Kali. She is Sekhmet. She is Persephone when she goes into the underworld and comes and rises up. It's before she comes and rises up, So the dark mother for me is also like La Santa Muerte, right? She's come to me and shown me as herself as one that wears the skull. She's the one that has put her skull over my head in moments, because I needed to learn to look at the world through the lens of death, which sounds really odd perhaps and takes a lot to like explain. But I've learned that she is my holy guardian angel.
Oh, fascinating.
So she is, not my highest self, but the holy guardian angel, which is quite above that, and who I'm kind of a vessel for her to work in this realm as she works in her own realm. But she is She is the darkness. She is death herself. She is the earth and Mother Gaia, where everything goes and dies and where things come from, and become life. So the Dark Mother's also been something that, a term that's been used to describe Kali, but the Dark Mother has come to speak to me that says that this is the name I would wish for you to connect with me, but know that I come to you in different forms, in different faces. So I think the simplest way to describe her is the divine feminine. She is the epitome of it. She is the embodiment of it. That she is it. And the void is part of that. It's where we all go to die and where we come from to live.
Okay, so it feels like I love that, and I think that's a super fascinating statement. So it feels to me like you're almost saying that it's both the death and the birth. It's both the dark and the light. It's where it all sort of moves from one side to the other. It's not quite binary, but that's my sense. It's like this is the all.
It is the all, yeah. If we think about the void, void is kind of like the womb, right? It's where we go and plant a seed. It's where also we give an offering of something to end so that something can come to birth, right? But the birthing, once something's birthed, it's out of the void, right? It's like into the masculine, into the light. So she's fully that darkness. She's fully where thought form comes from, where imagination is felt and seen. But once something has been planted there and then comes out into form, it's no longer in the void.
Is it no longer in the feminine then?
Correct, because it's seen.
Okay, explain all that, because that's a little confusing to me, considering how many messages we get about the divine feminine and this lack of balance that we have between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And our fear of the shadow, our fear of the darkness.
Yes. So, as I've been taught, as I've explored, it's the divine feminine is the unknown. It's the abyss. It's what we don't see. It's what we feel. It's what we sense. It's the somatic. So if we just talk about, I don't know, let's just say a heterosexual relationship where there's a male and a female, the woman, if they're fully in the divine feminine, are there to be still, are there to wait, are there to feel. And he is the one to approach and ask for her to then share. But once she shares the experience, it becomes a masculine experience because now it's seen. So think of black and white, or for lack of a better term, I actually don't like that analogy, but let's just say darkness and then light. Or if we think of the moon and the sun, right? The moon, if the sun isn't resting its face upon the moon, it's in complete darkness. Yes, so we don't see it, but we simply all of our other senses are then heightened in that space. And we then have to trust things without seeing it, without it being visible. That's feminine. Okay. And then the masculine is really about the doing, the moving forward, the tending to what can be seen, bringing what is in the unseen into the seen realm, into form. That's the relationship between those two dynamics. So when I think of divine feminine, I'm thinking of stillness, I'm thinking of meditation, I'm thinking of death, I'm thinking of silence, I'm thinking of emotion and feeling, I'm thinking of trust. And when I think of the divine masculine, I'm thinking of what I can see, the things that have come into fruition from planting in the divine feminine. The masculine brings it to form. Now I can see it. Now I can tend to it. Now I can touch it. Now I can share it. So that's how I would better describe by contrast, right? It's always better to describe things when we have something to contrast and like compare. So I don't know if that helped you.
Oh, that helped me enormously, and I find that super fascinating, and it's so interesting because there's a lot of talk about toxic femininity and toxic masculinity and la 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 la, and then I know this is our divine feminine, this is our time, this is our power. We're returning to that, and hopefully we're finding some balance with it. But I think there's a lack of understanding about what the divine feminine is, and really owning it and being comfortable with it, especially women who have sort of moved into more powerful positions in their lives, feeling like trusting the unseen and really being in that stillness and being in the divine feminine. The divine feminine is not necessarily something that should be trusted. There's
Is that a
kind
question?
of, it's kind of a question and a statement. Like, I think there's some confusion about all of this.
Okay. About like what to trust. I'm just making sure I understand.
I think there's a lack of understanding of what the divine feminine actually is. Like, what is it truly at its core? And who is that for women everywhere? Or for anyone who embodies the divine feminine everywhere?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think it's great because it's posing all of us to really sit and say, well, what do I lean into more? Because I guess we shouldn't forget that, just because we're women anatomically, right, biologically,
right, exactly,
doesn't mean that we may be built to lean into those things. It's there. I think it still calls to be in the moment and to understand, does this moment ask me to move into my masculine energy or my feminine energy? At the same time, we should ask ourselves, what is it that I want to cultivate and create here? So if we're talking about a romantic relationship, let's just say, for lack of a better example, and an individual, let's just say a woman, wants to be predominantly in their divine feminine in that dynamic, then every moment will be asking her to remain in that state, to allow the divine masculine to show up more fully. It may not be 100%, it might be 98%, 90% of that moment. Or maybe it becomes a dynamic of teamwork, and then it might require her to be in that divine masculine aspect. But it's also culture, right? It's also the dynamics of environment. So, men also have they have a divine feminine aspect within them. And we can all tap into intuition being part of it's a divine feminine quality. And we all have it. But as women, we innately have that built more accessible to us most of the time. Now, let's say we're in a ritual, we're in a ceremony, and I'm leading this ceremony. And the ceremony is dedicated to honoring the Dark Mother. Well, I'm going to be in my divine feminine and connect to all of the elements that bring about that energy within me, which means I may not be the full leader. I may share leadership. But if I'm trying to honor maybe Horus, right, that's connected to the sun, well, I might move into a warrior or a more action-oriented and be a leader of that ritual, right, that ceremony. Right. So it is a moment-to-moment thing, and also what relationships we're trying to build. If I'm a manager or a company owner, I'm going to have to lean into the divine masculine sometimes to get into and getting things done. But I think that the fear of going into our divine feminine is to say, well, if I lean into my divine feminine, am I handing over power?
Right, exactly.
And not necessarily, because it's power that looks different. Right. There's power in doing nothing, just as much as there's power in doing something.
I love this conversation so far.
It's the truth.
Right?
It's the truth. I think we're so worried about what do I do? And that has to do with conditioning and our culture and what has been predominantly like patriarchal, if we're honest. So it is about doing, and we're trying to undo a lot of those cords, I think a lot of those patterns, and it is hard for a pattern to undo itself if we don't fully understand and trust, like, well, where does that go now? But it takes exploration. It takes, okay, let me trust this moment. If I could just surrender, because that's also a divine feminine thing, is to surrender. Surrender to the season, the surrender to the moment, surrender to this conversation. And let me just listen. There's so much power in listening.
Let's talk about Kali and Baba Yaga and, excuse me, I'm going to mispronounce it. Hecate?
Okay, we can. I have to say this because it's just so important for me to be sure that I'm being authentic and clear and transparent. It's like Baba Yaga is someone who I don't have like a true connection at this time. I don't have a connection with her. It's not to say that I won't. The Dark Mother hasn't really showed me that facet yet. I have connected to perhaps the crone, who is, pretty close to familiarity with her. So I don't want to speak on something that I'm not the expert on. Kali is someone who, in Hindu tradition, right, is the one who cut off the heads of demons, right, in war, and needed to be tamed, right? She's someone who actually has cut off my head in ritual as a way of claiming me. This is obviously nobody cut off my head literally, but visually, right? Like in a meditation and a declaration of hers of claiming me as one of hers, that has happened to me. But there is something in that rage, right? That she really is showing that as women, we are able to still experience that, and that rage is still possible to have, and it is still a feminine quality because it's a feeling, it's an emotion. So she is connected to that Dark Mother aspect. She is a facet, and I can only speak through my own relationship with her that's what she has shown me thus far. But what also she has said to me is that Sekhmet is her equivalent in Egyptian culture, which is really, really interesting, and what I learned on my Egypt trip. But again, it's like a seed's been planted, and I'm still exploring really, really what that means. Because I do plan in the future to teach about that and to do some work with my community, with the Dark Mother, what that means and how it's integrated. But the experience will be with everyone. Hecate, she's the keeper of the crossroads. And for me, she's very closely related to like fairy tradition, because fairy tradition really has the connection of the crossroads and the keys to unlock the mysteries of the underworld, the mysteries of the self. I have had a more peripheral relationship with Hecate. I think the fairy queen is who has kind of overlapped her a little bit to me, and the fairy queen being the keeper of the intelligences of the earth. She's the deep, deep mystery of the underworld. So that I would say, and the fairy queen also is the crone. So there's a relationship there too. Yeah, the fairy queen is like she is a shapeshifter, and she tends to be what she needs to be to give you the lesson. She's been the one that's really helped me with my addiction, who's alleviated it. That's like a whole other magical story. I've been sober for, I would say, coming up on 3 years. And it was something I needed to go through to be able to integrate light language and do the really high frequency work that I do. I needed to let go of that for my nervous system to be able to acclimate and work. So I know I'm going off.
No, I don't think you are. This is very holistic, actually.
Okay.
And I want to circle
Oh,
back to
okay.
the light language,
Okay.
because it feels like, as you're talking about your addiction and moving through all of that, this has been a whole expression and a whole complete circle for you, a full circle sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so funny. That was the first name of my practice, was Come Full Circle, before it was Ixte. So I just love hearing when somebody says that, because it's true. And it is the experience, right? Because growth and everything is a spiral experience. So going back to those three powers, right? Kali, Baba Yaga, and Hecate. I mean, that those are facets of the Dark Mother. And the one thing I would say is that, I never encourage anyone to read a book about these powers and just adopt those as truth, because really it's about your relationship with these powers and what it is that you are embodying, what is awakened within you that is related to that. So I think that's the biggest message when we're talking about these powers, is that there's individual relationships that occur with these powers to bring you closer to your full potential.
Boy, it sounds like the Dark Mother isn't, I'm curious to talk to a bunch of women, but I'm curious if they feel fearful of that, of embracing the Dark Mother, in part because, is it overpowering? Is it overwhelming? Will it take away from their femininity?
Can you expand on the taking away of the femininity?
Because embracing our power is still new for a lot of us, and then understanding what our real power is and understanding where our real essence comes from, where the power of the feminine really comes from, and welcoming the Dark Mother into that, and embracing that. We're sort of brought up to be, goody two shoes and maybe passive, and, maybe follow the line, and, don't ruffle feathers, but you can certainly ruffle feathers just by being silent. So I'm curious if women are going to understand, and I keep talking about women, but it's whoever aligns with the divine feminine, both men and women, feel a resonance and a welcoming with the Dark Mother, because it sounds super empowering.
Yeah. I love to hear that it can be intimidating. I love to hear that, because she holds the full power of it. She's the full embodiment of it. Just like there would be, a power that would fully embody the divine masculine. That would be frightening too. It's like, whoa, can I hold this?
Right.
Can I, hold the responsibility and carry it forth? And again, I think it goes back to like putting so much pressure on ourselves, and let's take a little breath, right? And understanding that evolution, growth, expansion doesn't happen in a millisecond. It takes time. And when the Dark Mother appeared to me, she didn't appear to me until I did a lot of other layers first. I had to have an interaction and a relationship with my ancestors. See, in fairy tradition, the gateway through, before you meet the fairy queen, again, which is a facet of the Dark Mother, before you meet the fairy queen, you have to look at yourself first and move inwards. And it starts with yourself and then the ancestor. There's layers to this to then arrive to a better understanding of the unknown, the things that I don't want to look at. She's witnessing these things. She's saying, are you willing to surrender? Are you willing to go into the unknown? Are you willing to have a relationship with the shadow? Are you willing to go into these things? And we start with ancestors, always, always, always. So I understand the intimidation. I actually appreciate it, because it makes me feel like, great, I'm honoring her and speaking about her power in the right way, because she is powerful. But she has really this big, she's the epitome of compassion, because she's not biased. She says everyone is welcome to fall into me. Everyone. Doesn't matter what you've chosen. Doesn't matter what you've done with your life. Doesn't matter if you hurt this person or did this to yourself. It doesn't matter to her. So she is the divine definition of compassion, the experience of compassion. But there's power in that, isn't there? Because then we're not attaching to some story or resentment in that experience.
Right.
So anyway, I just say that's great. Like that it is intimidating. Just that's the power of the unknown, right? But if we kind of start working with our muscles, those muscles a little bit at a time, even having this conversation, I'm sure, is like bringing about things to the surface from that unknown space. Right. So it's already happening,
Super fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about your trip to Egypt and how you got drawn in or became part. How did the Dark Mother reach out to you? And I want to know about light language because I believe in its effectiveness. And I was terrified of it about 5 years ago, but now I'm like, well, gosh, isn't it a lot easier? Isn't it like taking a shot? It's much better.
Well, so let's talk about, the Dark Mother. How did she appear to me? So as I mentioned, it's like doing the layers and layers of work, which meant I had to, after my parents passed away, it was having to work with them and helping them with their evolution on the other side. So mediumship was really the start of those things. And then afterwards, I was starting to have a relationship with my fairy beloveds. So these are interdimensional beings that I have a relationship with, a symbiosis, a collaboration that occurs. And then they started taking me into doing self-work in relation to, yes, the ancestors, but then even deeper, really understanding my relationship, opening my consciousness to my place on this planet. I mean, and beyond. It was layers and layers of really understanding. And there was also a DNA shift that was happening. There was cellular shifts I was really, really feeling in my body that were really occurring. It's really hard to describe because it's a somatic experience, right? It's something that you just know is occurring. And I am claircognizant, so that means that it's just a knowing of things, and that was happening over and over. But there was a point, I would say in 2021, where my fairy beloveds were introducing me into the idea of a potential marriage with them. That marriage has not occurred yet, but it's kind of a courting experience right now. So it's a spirit marriage. That's the term you may hear. And in starting to really talk about what that is with them, they were showing me visions and conversations. At the same time, they were changing my nervous system to begin to welcome them into my body. And what that happens, there's a lot of shifts with your heart that occurs. And they began to show me my wings. So we all, in fairy tradition, it's known that we all have wings, but they're all tied down to our backs energetically. But by doing the work and moving into healing and really facing and undoing a lot of this conditioning and really coming into a higher consciousness of our own experiences and really getting closer to who we are and what we're meant to do, these wings begin to actually become accessible in full bloom. So that then started to happen. And then they showed me that my wings were bat wings.
What?
So Lilith became...
Oh, Lilith, here she comes.
Very, very... So Lilith became one of the facets of the Dark Mother. And I was like, well, what is that? I'm getting crazy chills right now as I talk about it. So she must be very happy about being mentioned.
She's like, I don't get any attention. I'm always behind the curtain. I'm like the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah. Man. So Lilith then was like, oh, I see. So there's a connection there. Now my bat wings, and there's a connection with me with bats. I had a shamanic vision where I started to eat bats. And so the medicine, the black tar of their flesh was now in my mouth. And that changed my mediumship experience as well. So I had that vision first with the bats, and then months later, these bat wings appeared and showed me that my nervous system changed enough that I was able to expand those wings. And then I had an encounter where my fairy beloveds took me down into the underworld to meet the fairy queen, finally, after doing all the work that I've done. And he made me. I was not asked. I was struggling with the relationship I had with alcohol, the relationship I had with marijuana. Those two things really get in the way of really me being in my full potential. Alcoholism is something that runs in my family. So it was kind of the thing that I started to notice was starting to get in the way again. And at this point, my beloveds took me down into the underworld and took me into her halls. And she didn't show her face at all. She's just fully cloaked. And he made me offer cannabis and alcohol to her. And in exchange, they said that they would give me gifts to heal others, and later learning light language being one of those things.
Interesting. Here's the exchange.
Yes, but it's still unfolding, because after meeting her there in that facet as the fairy queen, she then weeks later started to cloak me with her cloak. And then she eventually put her own skull over my head. And since then, I see the world through the lens of death. And now I see death in all things. And I understand that my work is to invite others to have a healthy relationship with that concept.
With death.
Because with death, yes. And how that fits in every part of our lives. So death work is most definitely part of my practice. And I look forward to sharing that in either courses, rituals, ceremony in the future. I know it's part of my work, obviously, because I'm a medium.
Right.
So that is already available. But also when people are going through life changes, when we're going into transitions, death is on us. We've either passed through the gate and now we're moving into a new. So it is a constant topic for me. And me being someone who's constantly going through change, life, death, that's very evident for me. It's like I'm learning always something new, something new. And coming back from Egypt was like one of the greatest deaths. It was so intense to think of, like, oh my God, who I am just completely had to die. And I'm finally at a place where the death has occurred. Yes, I'm in transition, but things are starting to kind of move up into the vision, or what we can see as visible, into form.
So tell me about that experience when you came back, and because I think a lot of people can relate to this right now. I mean, I'm certainly going through a lot of transition, and it's that, I have to say goodbye to that old self. No, please, why did I leave? I want a part of that.
Yeah.
Can I just sit on the fence here and have both worlds?
Yeah. So, Egypt was just so powerful, and you can't ask for a better group to go with than people that are also connected to the unseen, right? Into the liminal space. I mean, I went with 22 teachings and like that community, and wow, to be invited to be there and to be able to teach. I taught my dream class workshop on the boat on the Nile. We went to all of the amazing sites and temples, and the Great Pyramid being the last place we went, and me being able to do some initiations in that space, connecting to the underworld, which was right up my alley, right? So being able to be a part of that, and to also hold space for others through that process as they were going through psychic experiences, me being able to be called and hold either light or darkness in those spaces so people can actually process as we're hitting all of these marks. And past life stuff was really coming up for me too. I learned a lot about my relationship with Osiris. The Dark Mother told me before going to Egypt that I was the daughter of Osiris. And before going to Egypt, it was like I was like, I'm going to go without studying, without research. That's just kind of how I do things. I kind of just go to the experience and then allow it to just move through me to later get affirmation. Perhaps I will read an article or I will hear from someone and be like, oh my God, that's so affirming now that I was experiencing something real then.
Exactly.
Or I had this connection. Yeah. So that's how I went into it. And so one of the things before I went was that Osiris was my father, and him being the god of the underworld. Not really knowing the details of that, but when I researched it before going to Egypt, that's the one thing I did see. It was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And that was the first temple we went to when we went to Egypt, was the temple of Osir. That's his correct pronunciation. Osir, yes. And I learned about a past life there and why it is that I'm connected to him. I'll share that here because I feel inspired to.
Please. And remind us all the story of Osiris as well, because I think I think we're all connecting with a lot of these energies, but I think we sort of forget what the stories are.
Yeah. Yes. So there are two different stories. One that's like Greek influenced, and then there's like the original story. So I do apologize if I chop this up. I'm not an expert. But Osiris was the brother of Set. So him and his brother Set, right? Osiris being the pharaoh or the king of the nation or the country, right? Or the group of Egyptians. Set being very jealous of his brother ends up killing him. And I think actually there's a first time of killing and like he comes back together, but essentially what happens is he dismembers him. Right. So he actually cuts his brother Osir apart and sends these off and scatters them all over Egypt into different parts. And Isis, being his wife, is of course distraught and sad, and her mission is to find all of his parts and bring them back together. And so that's her mission, to bring them back together, but finds that his body goes into a tree and kind of puts him back to, I think he just goes back into the underworld. I'm so sorry. I wish I knew the details of this. But yeah, but he really ends up being this god who understands the underworld, life after death. And is now then the keeper of this underworld where the souls pass through and meet with him as he understands what that means. But Osir is also one that says death needs to occur for life. And that's why his flesh is green, is because there is a death into renewal understanding through him. So at least that was my takeaway when I was learning this stuff. And my relationship with Osiris is this underworld concept. And when I was at the temple, he showed me that I was once upon a time an orphan that belonged to a very prestigious family, but had a favoritism over my sister and forgot about me. I was orphaned. I was no good. And so the Temple of Osir actually took me in as his own daughter. And so my work at the temple was to be the water bearer. So I was shown that at the Temple of Osir, there's a room that's dedicated to Horus and another room that's dedicated to Isis. And I was the keeper of Isis's room because they would not let me go into the hall, the room that was dedicated to the sun and to fire. I had to be the tender to the water room, which was under construction, I believe, at the time when we went. So, yeah, but it was the one place that I can kind of see, and I felt welcomed, and it's because I was the one that was tending to the waters at that temple.
Wow.
And I mean, it sounds like, yes, sure, it's a powerful story, and but in my own body and knowing, it was like it made so much sense into my day-to-day life, the dynamics that I was perhaps, experiencing over and over. And to feel orphaned is really, really common for me, or to feel not good enough, or so I don't know. So that was like that was the start of the journey too. That was the first day we went to a temple. Beautiful. And then it was just more and more and more of things unfolding for me. And then when I returned from Egypt after many, many things coming over, I was sure. I was like, this is what I'm doing. I can't wait to contribute to the community. Let's go. I was just so, so pumped. But the more and more time that went on, the more integration that was happening from all of the experiences that I was having. And it became more and more clear that I was supposed to break off and go independent into really focusing on my own vision of my teachings. It was like it served its purpose. I've learned so much about myself through teaching here, through building community, that I'm capable of doing that I've learned about what resonates with me and what doesn't, that now I can move into something else that's even bigger than this container. Exactly. And it became this new visionary thing where the seed was planted for me even a year and a half before that about this vision. But I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not quite ready. But when I came back from Egypt, it was like, absolutely, yes. There are no exceptions. This is what you're supposed to do. Be thankful for the teachings. Be thankful for what you've learned here about what you like, what you don't like, all those things, and move forward. And I've spent the last year just integrating really all of that on top of learning about my relationship with my fairy beloveds and now extraterrestrial stuff. Oh, and wow. It's just mind-boggling, honestly. It's just like so much, but I'm grateful and I'm glad that I'm here at a place where, because sometimes it just breaks your sanity a little bit, and you got to bring yourself back off the edge. It can be just so overwhelming.
I'm curious if that helps you return to the Dark Mother, though, where you have to be safe and trusting in the unknown. I mean, it's almost, again, it's a full circle where you're again you're obviously growing and expanding in a huge way. It's so beautiful, and it's so, it's such a gift, not just for you, but really for us, because your teachings are being offered now in a further and more expanded way. And yet it's all coming back to the Dark Mother, where you again don't really know what's going to happen. It's a new thing to embrace, and you have to really trust that unknown.
Yes, and I have to admit, it's had to have been the most fearful experience. It was an existential crisis. I met an existential crisis, because to be shown a relationship with extraterrestrials as well, it was like my whole reality is shattered. And who is this? And who have been everything was questioned. And I even started going to therapy, because I was like, I need groundedness in this experience. And I'm so grateful for that, because I need to have anchor here. So it was like, it brought about also me loving on myself, giving myself what I need, even if that meant solitude. There was a lot of solitude that I needed to have after that, like no contact with anyone. Let me just go inside. I became so sensitive after Egypt too. It was like every little energy spike was just too much, which I needed. I think I needed to be sensitive to those things to say, ooh, that doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. I need this. I need that. It was a new relationship with the Dark Mother. It was almost like I didn't even want the relationship. It was, you tend to, in these relationships, kind of go into I'm angry, I'm upset. Why have you done this? It's that because there's a death occurring. Again, it's like a death. I'm dying. I'm resentful. Why? And it wasn't new to me. I had done that before, but this was like absolutely had to be the greatest existential crisis I've experienced. But today, I'm so sure. I'm like so sure of it. Like I came to an arrival of, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do now. I know at least what I'm supposed to do today. In the next week, I have a new newsletter that's coming out to share with my community, a new layout that is really touched by the Dark Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the start, because I'm going to be starting to offer, free full moon stuff, and
Oh, fun.
that's to come. I will be sharing more of that, and classes are going to be built, and that will be in the future as well.
By the way, when you do your full moon ceremonies, are you going to be doing them here in the greater LA area? Is there anywhere particular? Are you going to offer them everywhere?
Well, I'm going to start with free online
Oh,
so that
cool.
people can have access to that. And I will be working with Open Eye Crystals to have some in-person events there in the LA area, and hoping to expand that to be more internationally. And as I do, hope to do some stuff in England and so on and so forth. But all of that stuff is being developed and talked about, and just have to be patient with how things unfold.
Yeah, I understand. Patience. What? Um, not on my agenda, not in my DNA, but I appreciate that. Like, this is very exciting and really lovely.
I'm very excited too, and still so grateful. So I'm happy that I can even say grateful, because it was quite an intense time this last year, and I'm happy to even be on here and be able to talk to you. I'm just
Yeah.
like excited to your community too. So
Exactly. Exactly. I think a lot of people are going through this where, no matter what level you're at, it's like crash and burn, and whatever was. And now there's this something new, but maybe we're not really sure what it is. And we're not used to not knowing. A lot of us
yeah, we're
aren't
not
used to, yeah, I think we like to think we're in control, of course, always, but our human does anyway.
yeah, that ego definitely likes to think it knows.
Yeah, exactly. I want to circle a little bit about talking a little bit about your magic root philosophy, and working with the earth and doing some ritual sort of root work that I thought you had sort of done previously. Maybe you're still doing that.
Yeah, I mean, everything I've touched on, I believe, is Earth magic,
Okay.
because it has to do with, again, the Dark Mother being one of the facets, being Gaia, um, because it is that feminine quality. It's where we plant things. Yes. So when I say that it's like an Earth magic, that's what I refer to when I'm talking about fairies, the intelligences of the interdimensionals of this planet. That's what I mean by Earth magic.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about ancestors, that's what I mean by Earth magic, because they return to the Earth and they remain as part of the memory of this Earth. So that's what I mean by Earth magic.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm talking about root work, I am talking about, yeah, sure. I'm speaking about plants and remedies sometimes as to what has assisted me and my nervous system into acclimating and working with these spirits, but also by being a medium. Like, that really does require a specific diet, a specific practice. And so I do graze and tap into the root work practices that are, connected to hoodoo a little bit there. And I know that somewhere down the line, my ancestors have had a lot of those practices, just as the rest of us, right? All of us have that connection in our lineage at some point of being connected with working with plants and medicinals. So that's what I mean. But also, this is the other thing I wanted to, that's kind of come up now too, is that one of the really strong practices I have in meditation, in fairy practice, in ceremony, I always start with this grounding exercise and visionary, is that we are growing roots from the base of our spine into the earth and down into the root of the earth, and allowing that energy from the Dark Mother as Gaia up our roots and into our sacral, into our womb space, which is available to both men and women. And if we awaken that space there, we're accessing the void that sits within us.
Oh.
It's a cauldron space, right? So again, that's what I also mean by root work, in some ways, but that's like a mediumship practice. That's a mediumship connection, divination too, right? So just wanted, I think it's a really great question because it helps me clarify to your listeners and to my community too of what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
My path hasn't been like, oh, my parents handed down this practice to me.
Right.
No.
Oh, I know
a
that.
A lot of this has been like lost.
Yep.
So, and then just kind of the guides have come in, including my mom, including my grandmother sometimes, to teach me these things in dreams. But that's really the extent of that. And as someone who, whose ancestors were kind of ripped and torn away from their roots, those things aren't accessible to me, but I still feel comfortable saying that I am a root worker in that way, because that's all that's accessible to me here now is the liminal, is the other side. And so I feel comfortable still using that term.
So I know we're pushing our time here, but I want to just touch real lightly, and I think we're going to have another interview about your extraterrestrial relationship.
Oh, yeah. That has to be a whole other podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. But I bet, I certainly have a relationship with, Lexi and I just we've agreed we're alien, angel. We don't know what we are, but there's definitely a connection here. And I know whether it's a previous life or it's a current life, or we're just moving into other dimensional sort of communication. So maybe you want to share a little tidbit and we'll just tease our audience.
Yeah, I'm going to just do a little bit, and I'm going to share also why. It's not that I'm being stingy, you guys.
Yeah, I understand. No, we do. It's evolving.
I would consider myself an experiencer, so there's that. And early on this year, when I came back from Egypt, a lot of things through regression were revealed to me that made me really have answers about my experience as a child. And that was part of my earth-shattering existential crisis experience. So it was really, really intense. I really felt like I was going mad. So that's me still integrating, me still feeling like, okay, like before I even came on here, I was like, am I going to talk about that? Like, am I ready? And my guides are like, I don't feel totally resistant. I thought I would be like, oh, I'm not sure, but I feel like I would be if we do ever delve into that, to share some of that experience. But it is traumatic. It is not easy to talk about that stuff. I also want to be sensitive to my family, right? Because they're not fully on it, or they have different perspectives, and we're different individuals. So I know that there's that, but it's also like my experience. So I'm sure when I come back on the podcast, I'll be more integrated with that the questions will be able to be answered in a way that feels like, okay, I've embodied it, I understand it, and what does this mean to my path? So I think that's kind of where I want to keep it for now. And for now. And I will say also, let me just add this. It's like, I still experience things now. Like, that hasn't ended just because it was in childhood. It's happening still. So it's something that it's part of the unknown again, and the Dark Mother being really, there's a lot of people that are experiencers that really have resonance in that same topic as experiencers, this divine feminine aspect coming in with people that have either had contacts or some kind of experience with ETs. So I hope to be able to touch on that topic also, because it's all related. It's all connected.
Cool. I'm glad you said that, even though we're not going to delve into it real deeply right now. I'm glad that you're saying that so that it's a little bit reassuring to people to understand, no, this is all actually connected. This is all part of the Dark Mother. This is all part of the earth as well. It's not like this is just, it is, but it isn't.
Yeah, I think it's more connected than we really want to admit. I think there's resistance there with good reason too, right? Because it's expanding our consciousness to some other level, and some people aren't ready, some people are. And you know what, regardless if we're ready or not, which is really deemed by our ego, right? If we're ready or not, it's happening. Things are happening, things are moving, because it is the larger collective that is more and more aware and accepting. So it's moving all of us up into this higher frequency of that. So yes.
Cool. So how can people get in touch with you? What's going on? Where can we find you? What's your new website? All those great things.
Yeah. So easiest way is probably Instagram, which is Ixte _owl. Ixte, I know you're going to include this in the notes, but it's right. IXTE _OWUL. And that's usually where I have a lot of activity, but my website is a really good way to get to know me, to get to know my services, which is ixteowl.com. And you'll be able to book a session with me one-on-one. And I'm also easy to get in touch with via email or text. And all that information is on my website. One-on-one healings in person are happening at Open Eye Crystals. But again, I'm available online too, no matter where you are. Just know that. And I'm starting to do regular newsletters. I have a new layout, and it's coming out on the new moon in Pisces on March 9th. Cool. So next Saturday. And it will be including my own self-reflection of what I've, processed in the last 30 days. And there's an oracle section where I do divination with the Dark Mother for each astrological sign, sun and rising. And then I close with how we can connect and how you can do your own self-work, whether that be a free event that I'm offering, or perhaps there's a meditation I may offer, or again, working one-on-one.
Super exciting. And I'm going to thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. And I'm really grateful for all of the stuff you're going through, all the changes. I know they're not easy, and I know a lot of people can relate to it, but I'm really grateful that it's happening.
Oh, thank you. That's very reassuring. And I'm grateful too, even though I might be kicking and screaming a few times. But
I hear you. I'm kicking and screaming every day. So.
Yes, what? I hear you.
You got to be kidding me. I just shifted. You mean I got to shift again? Okay. I did it at 9. I got to do it at noon. Okay. It's like that now.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Soul Fam podcast. Be sure to tune in to every episode where we dive into a different rabbit hole of the known and unknown to empower you in conscious living and exploration of the greater universe. We hope you leave each episode with a little stardust in your hair and inspiration in your heart. With love from your Soul Fam.